What the hell were you two doing there in the first place? How long has it been since you've been stabbed by some teen morons? Train and Klaus looked at each other. It was not in the spirit of Delmain Backwater to play the caring daddy, even though he was indeed Train's father. Of course, none of the ring members had any reason to frequent the Rot Gut, as the few outer sectors of the station where Train and Klaus had been ambushed were called. Unlike the rest of the station, the Rot Gut had virtually no intelligible governance, either official or criminal. Even by the station standards, Rot Gut was an ugly slum, with a few teenage gangs fighting for power without much success. Chief Kishida, oddly enough, was okay with this. He recruited the fresh meat from the gangs he had caught, and from time to time, usually before an election, he organized noisy raids with a pompous announcement of the results of the cleanup. But then new gangs took their place, and the wheel of anti-karma kept turning. As for the rest of the station's inhabitants, they simply couldn't care less about the Rot Gut. Look, Del, you know as well as we do that things aren't going well, Klaus said judiciously. After the feds intercepted that transport from New Hope, we still can't recover our losses. Train and I had tips on good deals, so we thought we'd see if we could fish out anything. Good deals in Rot Gut? A batch of homemade knives and kitchen-brewed poison dope? The ring doesn't do that kind of shit. Chill out, Train said. Yeah, we may have been a little stupid on that, but at least we're looking for a way out. We've dealt with this Alchin before on small stuff, and there's never been a problem. If anyone knew he was messing with serious players, the rumors would have reached us by now. Everyone's alive, everyone's in place, and since the shit already hit the fan, we shouldn't blame each other, but start finding out what it really was and who was behind it. Delmain was silent for a few seconds, breathing heavily, then gave up and sank into his chair. Shank and Kylina were attacked today too, he said, looking at the wall of old stereo images to the left of his desk. They were supposed to meet with Quan representatives at Dock 8 about shipments through the Celestial Temple. They're fine, he said ahead of Klaus, who had already opened his mouth. Kylina's arm is a little snagged, but it's nothing serious. A couple days in the Regan sleeve, and she'll be fine. She and Shank whisked off to his place, taking a few days off to get well. Another turret? Train asked. They don't know. It was a nasty spot. They couldn't get a good look at anything or fight back, so they preferred to get the hell out of there, especially since Kylina was out of condition. I told you couldn't trust Quan, Klaus grumbled, slumping back in his chair. His red-haired hands clenched into massive fists. Traitors once, traitors forever. Train pulled up a chair and sat at the other side of Delmain, across from Klaus. The war ended 30 years ago, Klaus, he said. And Quan was only about 5 years old then. They're all the same, father and son. Klaus slammed his fist on the table. Ullerian spawn. I don't give a damn whose spawn they are, Delmain said. Quan had nothing to do with it. How can you be so sure? Train asked. Because Quan's men never made it out of the 8th dock. All 3 of them were mowed down by the first burst. Delmain sighed. And now we'll have to explain to Quan that we had nothing to do with it. He looked at Klaus. And given your history with the Celestial Temple, that won't be easy. If it were up to me, I'd put 3 or 4 antimatter torpedoes into their stinking station, Klaus said. But I'd do it honestly, without all the dirty sneaking around. You know me. I do. But Quans would want more than have me personally vouch for you. So the 2 of you are gonna find out who might be behind this right away. Are you sure the 2 attacks are connected? Train asked. Are you saying that we've got 2 crazies on the station who have balls of iron enough to take on the ring? Delmain answered the question with a question. And with access to weapons no one's seen in 15 years, Klaus said. I agree with Del. But why don't we leave the search to our precious Chief Kishida? After all, it's his job. Let him do something useful instead of stepping on our toes and spitting in our drinks. Before Dell could respond, the green light on the comm panel in front of him flashed. Dell looked at the screen of the device. "You can ask him that question in person," he said. "Kishida would be here in a moment." He rubbed his forehead tiredly. "And you'd better quickly come up with some decent lies to tell him about your reasons for coming to the Rot Gut." Once upon a time, a very long time ago, Station D13 was a large commercial and industrial complex, a hub of intersystem business that covered at least a few dozen inhabited worlds, and not only human ones. Then, the war with the Ullerians began, and interstellar trade came to an end. The station was lucky. It was on the opposite edge of the populated sector of the galaxy from the front line, and the fighting never reached it. But the refugees did. Already in the final stage of the war, when it became clear that the Federation was about to crush the Ullerians, the aliens undertook a desperate suicide raid on the rear of the Earth's sphere of influence. No longer attempting to occupy and exploit inhabited planets, they destroyed everything they could. Due to the peculiarities of psychology, the Ullerians concentrated their strikes exclusively on planets, and when the real panic in the colonies began, streams of refugees poured into the station scattered in various corners of the developed sector of the galaxy. Station D13 has not had the best of days. For various reasons, the military did not requisition its industrial facilities for military purposes, and the cut-off supply lines and lack of orders practically finished off all the industrial enterprises located there. Trade died with them, and the station had a rather miserable existence, gradually becoming a ghostly semblance of itself. The first wave of refugees at the station was even welcomed, hoping that the influx of population would somehow revitalize the fading life of the huge complex. But the first was followed by a second, third, fourth, and fifth as the Ullerians fought their way to new colonies. Eventually, the Federation fleet caught up with the remnants of the Ullerian raiders and completely destroyed them. But by then, the station's population had increased nearly 200-fold. The station teetered on the brink of sliding into nightmarish chaos. Food supplies had been cut off since the war began, and the hydroponic farms had barely enough capacity to meet the natives' needs. New facilities had to be built urgently, but there was no more talk of hydroponic gardens of any kind. There were endless vats of chlorella and primitive but efficient plants that processed the chlorella into tasteless rations. The remaining Federation officials tried to maintain at least a semblance of order, but their power did not extend beyond the most privileged areas of the station. Refugees and marooned locals began to self-organize to protect themselves from the rapidly flourishing crime. This usually took place around the offices of large companies, many of which were still inhabited by former employees of those companies, and some of which still had decent arsenals. One such office was the headquarters of Backwater Enterprises, a small spacecraft and orbital repair and maintenance company owned by the Backwater family. Although left virtually bankrupt, the Backwaters did not flee the station that had long been their home. By negotiating, and sometimes by violent clashes with various factions, they gradually brought relative order to the station and became its practical rulers. Then, the war ended, and the Federation returned. Some refugees went home, but most stayed behind, as many had nowhere to go after the Ullerian raid. The Federation, shriveled by the war, did not favorably regard the self-appointed local rulers. Under pressure from the military and police, the Backwaters were forced to fade into the shadows, gradually becoming like those they had once fought against. However, the station's population had forgotten nothing, and not only the Backwaters, but also the station's governors and police chiefs had to find a new balance. The official name D13 remained only in the official Federation registry. Everyone else now knew the station as Backwater Station. That included the station's longtime chief of police, Hideki Kishida, who was now entering the main office of Backwater Enterprises, where Delmain, Train, and Klaus were waiting for him.